Hey, welcome to Sleep Crime Stories. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? A quick comment and a subscribe go a long way, it really helps. Now, turn down the lights, and let's begin tonight's case. The summer of 1985 in London turned out to be sunny and warm, breathing nature and tranquility. However, at 3:30 on the morning of August 7th, a sudden phone call rang at the home of Jeremy Bamber, heir to the White House farm. The young man, barely awake, picked up the phone, wondering who could be calling him so early. On the other end of the line was his foster father, his voice sounding unusual. He was clearly panicking, and Jeremy couldn't make out his father's words. He tried to concentrate and realize what had happened, but his son's efforts were futile, and soon there was an eerie silence on the other end of the line. The last thing Jeremy heard from his father was, "Your sister's gone crazy. She's got a gun." An alarmed Jeremy, wasting no time, immediately called the police and reported the frightening conversation, emphasizing the possible danger from his sister. Officers arrived on the scene an hour and a half late after receiving the call. They were followed by Jeremy himself. There was a strange silence and stillness all around. This was suspicious after what the son of the farm owners had described to the police over the phone. Since it was suspected that weapons were involved, the English police decided not to rush inside, which was their professional tactic. The effectiveness of such actions can be discussed endlessly, but it is up to the English authorities. When they arrive at the scene of a call, they are usually unarmed and do not interfere in what is happening, waiting either for the situation to resolve itself or for a special unit to intervene. The police officers remained at a distance from the house, and Jeremy was close to them. They asked him to tell them everything that had happened at the Bambers' house the night before. According to Jeremy, on the evening of the previous day, they had been sitting around the dinner table as a family. There was a slight misunderstanding at the end of dinner, but nothing serious that could have caused such a tragedy. He also added that he had left his weapons, a pistol and a .22 caliber carbine, with his parents. Both weapons were serviceable and loaded. A special team that arrived on the scene found that all doors and windows in the house were locked, except for the window in the master bedroom on the first floor. Using a loudspeaker, they spent 2 hours trying to communicate with someone in the house, but the only sound that came from the house was the barking of a dog. Nearly 3 hours had passed since the first police officers arrived on the scene. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the SWAT team finally made their way inside the house, where an eerie silence reigned. The group moved carefully around the first floor, looking carefully through the rooms. As they approached the kitchen, they witnessed chaos. An overturned chair lay on the floor, and in a pool of blood lay the lifeless body of a man. It was Neville Bamber, Jeremy's father. Neville's body looked disfigured, bruises and abrasions on his arms and face, a broken nose and jaw, as if he had fought fiercely. There was no way to help him. 8 bullet wounds, including 6 to the head, had completely eliminated his chances of survival. On one of the surfaces of the kitchen lay a telephone with its receiver removed, next to several rounds of .22 caliber ammunition. The picture shocked the police officers, but they had to move forward to investigate the entire house in detail. It was decided to scrutinize the first floor first, and then move to the second floor if there were no other family members present. Every step had to be controlled to avoid unnecessary noise, but this proved to be a difficult task given the creaky floor of the old house. There was no one else on the first floor, but on the second floor, in 2 bedrooms, 4 more bodies were found: June, Sheila, and 2 small boys, Daniel and Nicholas. They had all been killed by gunshots. June had been shot 7 times, Daniel and Nicholas 5 and 3 shots each. Sheila was lying on the doorstep of her parents' bedroom with 2 bullet wounds under her chin and a gun in her hands. 25 bullets had been used to kill 5 family members. That number of bullets raised questions. Was it possible that someone had deliberately decided to take out the Bambers on purpose? And what was the motive? Could it be that the real culprit was trying to mislead the police? Answers to all of these questions were needed, and authorities immediately began investigating and began researching the history of all members of the dead family. The history of the Bamber family. The county of Essex, with its nature, is in close proximity to the noisy and crowded London, where there is always an endless stream of tourists flowing. Nevertheless, it retains its value in the eyes of the locals, providing a haven from the bustling capital. The county invites you to relax body and soul, enjoy the fresh air, stroll through endless green meadows, taste crystal clear lake water, visit medieval castles, and immerse yourself in fascinating stories. It was probably these benefits that made Essex an attractive destination for the Bamber family, who decided to settle here. June and Neville, with the acquisition of White House Farm, were able to make their dream come true. In 1949, at the age of 25, June married Neville and the couple set off to their farm, aiming to build a strong and prosperous family. Neville, a veteran of the Royal Air Force, having completed his years of service, took on the role of magistrate of the local court. However, fate presented the couple with several unforeseen twists and turns. June's long efforts to get pregnant proved futile, but they did not despair, and decided to turn to an orphanage to take in their family 2 children. So Sheila, at just 3 months old, and later Jeremy, at 6 months old, became part of their lives. June and Neville proved to be caring parents, filling their children's days with love and care. Growing up, their children received an excellent education from them at prestigious private schools. The Bambers' financial situation was extremely prosperous, allowing them to provide their children with every opportunity. Jeremy, despite the brilliant education, was characterized by a withdrawn character and preferred solitude from childhood. His tendency to rebelliousness was evident in elementary school, where he did poorly, which led to his parents' decision to send him to boarding school in 1970, when he was 9 years old. The English boarding schools of the time were rigid, and Jeremy quickly realized that there would be strict discipline. The years at boarding school were difficult, but may have played a role in changing Jeremy's character for the better. Having excelled at university, he became more calm, and his parents were proud of their son. After successfully completing university, Jeremy's father, Neville, offered him a job on a farm in England. The young man immediately accepted the offer, and in 1982, he returned from the journey he had been on since completing his studies. His parents provided him with comfortable accommodations, including a cottage, a car, and a good salary. They also counted on him to help them in their old age. However, despite outward success within the family, Jeremy faced tensions related to religious differences. June, a deeply religious woman, experienced turbulent emotions because her children did not share her religious beliefs. Her attempts to guide them toward faith were futile. Difficulties in family relationships and frustration led her to depression. She underwent treatment that included the use of electroshock, which at the time was considered a method of dealing with mental illness. Sheila, June, and Neville's daughter also had a significant impact on her mother's development of depression. Unlike her calmer brother Jeremy, she was fascinated by the fashion world and dreamed of becoming a model, but June adamantly denied the idea, not wanting to hear about her daughter being involved in the world of show business. These were just a few of the many surprises Sheila gave her parents. At the age of 17, she announced she was pregnant, and June was faced with a difficult choice: forbid her daughter to have a child out of wedlock, as it was religiously unacceptable, or force her to have an abortion, which is also forbidden in the Christian world. In the end, June relieved herself of all responsibility and asked Sheila to make the decision herself, but in such a way that no one in their family would ever know that she had gotten rid of the pregnancy. The result was a deterioration in the relationship between mother and adopted daughter. In 1977, Sheila did marry Colin Cuffell, the father of her first unborn child, despite her parents' protests. The young men became a family and soon had twins, Nicholas and Daniel. However, after some time, Sheila began to suspect her husband of infidelity and filed for divorce. This had a serious impact on her mental health. Sheila spent several months in a psychiatric hospital, where she was also treated with electroshock therapy just like her mother. Meanwhile, Sheila's sons were sent to an orphanage where they stayed for almost 2 years. Sheila's health only worsened. She became anxious, often expressing a desire to take her and her children's lives, claiming that they were under the influence of the devil. She suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, while Jeremy, who used to cause a lot of problems for his parents, calmed down and was happy with his life on the farm. In 1985, Sheila met up with her ex-husband Colin again, and they reunited, taking their sons from the orphanage. In August, Sheila and her children were invited to the Bamber home to meet her parents. They were going to stay there for a week, after which Colin and the boys were to take a trip to Norway. He brought Sheila and the children to the farm, and on Tuesday, August 6, 1985, everyone gathered at the beautiful White House farmhouse. Turned out to be the last dinner of the Bamber family. A few days after the tragedy, the Bamber's funeral was held, and naturally Jeremy attended. It was a difficult and bitter moment for him. He cried a lot and was shocked by what had happened. But it was on this day that the investigation took a new turn. Strange behavior was noticed in Jeremy's behavior, which relatives of the Bamber family reported to the authorities. During breaks between bouts of grief and tears, he would utter ridiculous phrases, referring to himself as the boss. Those around him saw a smile on his face, and it was an unusual smile, but a smile characteristic of a contented winner. All these observations and remarks were passed on to the authorities, and they decided to investigate more thoroughly. On this ill-fated evening, everything seemed perfect. A family dinner, a joyous mood, a delicious meal. However, one comment made by Neville and June changed things. The parents suggested that Sheila send the children back to the orphanage, emphasizing that she was unable to provide them with a proper upbringing. This provocative suggestion displeased Sheila, and she reacted sharply, saying that she was already thinking about it and would make a decision on her own. The warm atmosphere of the evening was broken. At 9:30 p.m., Jeremy headed to his house. At the same time, Barbara Wilson, the secretary of the Bamber farm, called with a work-related matter. Neville picked up the phone, and Barbara noticed that he was irritable. There were loud voices in the background. People seemed to be arguing excitedly. This atmosphere amazed Barbara, for such a thing was a rare occurrence for the Bummers. She was unable to find out the cause of the conflict, however, as Neville quickly ended the conversation and hung up the phone. The next morning, all the family members in the house were found shot dead. Jeremy was the only one of the family left alive. He was unable to hide his tears. Investigators were respectful of his emotions and gave Jeremy time to recover before beginning interviews. Jeremy shared all the information available, not forgetting to mention the difficulties his sister had faced in life and the conflict over dinner on the evening of August 6th before he left the house. At first glance, the crime committed by Sheila appears to be a desperate and certainly unconscious act given her mental state. Under the influence of a parental remark, she could not stand the new invasion of her privacy, lost her mind, and resorted to gun violence, shooting the Bummers, her children, and herself. Investigators were certain that's exactly what happened. During an examination of the house, it became clear that the crime, which destroyed almost the entire family, was committed by the Bambers' mentally unstable adopted daughter, Sheila. This was evidenced by the weapon found lying on her body, pointing upwards towards her chin. The actions of the detectives subsequently seem rather absurd. The police decided to put the house in order, and to organize a strange process of burning the bloody bedding and carpets on which the bodies were lying. The police reasoned that they wished to rid Jeremy of the horrible memories of what had happened, and the weapon found at the scene, which was potential evidence, was picked up by the officer with his bare hands. Reopening the investigation required a thorough examination of the scene to avoid jumping to conclusions. The first step was for detectives to examine the weapon. Several people's fingerprints were found on the barrel, including the investigator, who apparently picked up an important piece of evidence without using gloves. The presence of Sheila's and Jeremy's prints didn't raise any questions. Jeremy confirmed that it was his gun, designed for hunting. He had purchased it legally. Sheila's prints, being a suspect in this crime, were quite expected. However, it is worth noting that the alleged perpetrator was shot twice in different parts of her body. How did she manage to subsequently take her own life? And that's where things started to become clearer. Suddenly, Julie, Jeremy's girlfriend, began to express doubts about his innocence. She contacted investigators and provided them with some curious details. On the night of August 7th, Jeremy called her, reporting problems at the farm. However, when Julie tried to find out more, Jeremy abruptly hung up. In addition, she recalled that several times before the tragedy, Jeremy had complained to her about his family, expressing fatigue with his in-laws. But the most shocking aspect of her testimony concerned the Bummers' will. It turns out that the Bummers had made a will stating that all of their property was to go to their children upon their death, half to each. And also their mother was going to rewrite their share in favor of the twins Sheila. This fact turned Jeremy against his sister. He did not like this prospect, and he openly shared it with his friend. Besides, Neville's will stated that Jeremy would have to work on the farm to get his share of the inheritance. But the worst part was when Julie heard him say how Jeremy dreamed of killing his family and putting the blame on the mentally unstable Sheila. He demonstrated some good acting skills by portraying himself as a witness to the tragic drama in front of the police officers. According to Julie, she told the police about it not only out of a desire to help in the investigation, but also out of a thirst for revenge, having learned about Jeremy's mistress. In an attempt to cover his tracks and draw the detective's attention away from himself, Jeremy gave the police the name of a potential suspect. He targeted a plumber he supposedly hired to work on the property. However, this cunning plan did not work. The plumber was found and interrogated, but his alibi was solid. The plumber not only did not understand why he was being questioned about the crime, but also provided clear evidence that he was elsewhere at the time of the events. Thus, the circle of suspects was narrowed down to one, Jeremy Bamber himself. Despite his temporary arrest, the lack of concrete evidence led to his release. Moreover, the police did not restrict his travel abroad, although it was known that after the inheritance, Jeremy's financial condition had improved markedly. Soon, he had already left England and traveled to Saint-Tropez, France to enjoy a vacation, and a few days before, he easily got rid of his father's car by selling it. Jeremy's cousins demanded that the version that Sheila killed her family be reconsidered. They went to the police and the media, to which the deputy head of the CID once ordered the Bamber cousins to leave his office when they asked him to consider that James Bamber had arranged the whole thing. Afterward, one of the brothers decided to inspect the scene in secret from the others. His strong doubts about Sheila's involvement in the murder prompted him to look for more evidence. By then, Jeremy had gotten the keys to his parents' house and was living there all alone. His cousin managed to get through the door and around every corner of the house, hoping to find some new evidence, and his search was successful. In one of the closets, he found an item that gave him a shock: a silencer for a .22 caliber carbine with traces of blood. It was something that spurred him to new conclusions. The length of the weapon, including the installed silencer, told him that the assailant would not have been able to turn it on himself and shoot himself. This meant that Sheila could not have been involved in the crime. Having been shot twice and bleeding, she would not have been able to remove the silencer and hide it deep in the closet. But assuming that she fired without this additional device, a new question arises. Why were there traces of blood on the end of the silencer? Thus, it only confirmed that it had been fitted to the carbine at the time of the crime. On September 29th, Jeremy returned home and was immediately arrested and charged with the murder of the Bamber family. The trial, which lasted 18 days, began on October 3, 1986 at Chelmsford Crown Court. Jeremy Bamber looked arrogant as he took his seat in the dock. Throughout the trial, prosecutors accused him of lying. The station's telephone technicians checked and confirmed that the phone line at Bamber's home was busy that night. The medical examiner's testimony at trial was key. Injuries on Neville's body found by the experts included several bruises, indicating that the elderly man had resisted blows. The medical examiner suggested that Neville had been beaten with the very same .22 caliber carbine. However, given Sheila's frailty and short stature, it is doubtful that she could have inflicted such serious injuries on her father before his death. It is more likely that Jeremy was capable of such an act. Neville's body was covered in bruises, and it is obvious that Sheila must have also taken a few blows during the fight. However, there were no signs of beatings or bruises on her body. Jeremy's lawyers insisted that Sheila, despite her mental problems, was physically fit and capable of crime. Her experience with guns and excellent shooting skills were arguments that she could have committed the crime. They also noticed that Sheila's blood was fresher than that of other family members. which, in their opinion, indicated the likelihood that she had first massacred her family and then herself. This may have been the result of a realization of her act or, as the defense lawyers suggested, a reaction to the approaching police officers. After hearing these theories, the prosecution unequivocally refuted them. The silencer was found in the closet with traces of blood belonging to Sheila, although logically it should have been on the carbine. These statements were irrefutable. The defense was in a difficult position and had no more arguments to counter the prosecution's case. According to the prosecution, the motive for the crime was Jeremy's anger at learning of the divided will. The money was the reason he had arranged the bloodbath. On the day of the incident, the housekeeper saw Sheila and did not notice anything unusual in her behavior. The day before, 2 employees had also seen her with the children and said she was happy and adequate. According to the testimony of Barbara Wilson, the farm clerk, she called Neville at about 9:30 p.m. and was under the impression that she had broken off an argument. Barbara said that Neville was not happy and seemed to hang up in annoyance, which he had never done before. In her opinion, he was a calm man. It was at this time, between 10:30 and 10 o'clock, that Jeremy left his in-laws and headed home. Late at night, he returned on the bicycle he had borrowed from his mother a few days before the events, avoiding the main road so as not to be seen. Taking advantage of an open window in a first-floor room, Jeremy got inside and found a pre-prepared and loaded gun. When he entered his parents' bedroom, he fired 2 shots, killing Jane. Then he pointed the gun at Neville, but his father woke up and tried to defend himself. A struggle ensued, during which father and son went downstairs, and there Jeremy was able to kill his father in the kitchen. He then returned to the bedroom where he finished off Sheila and her children. To make it appear that his sister was guilty of the crime, Jeremy placed the carbine in the dead Sheila's hands. Afterward, he returned to his bike and headed home. He first called his friend Julie, and almost gave himself away with excitement, and then called the police, talking about his father allegedly calling. This call also raised questions for the investigation. If Neville was in danger, he probably would have gone to the police, not to his son. And the phone in the Bamber house was not covered in blood, even though the father, according to Jeremy's testimony, was probably injured at the time of the call. This suggested that the telephone receiver in the house had been removed for staging. Jeremy's own behavior also raised suspicions. Why, after his father called, did he not rush to the scene? After all, it was his family. Based on all the known facts and assumptions, the jury retired to deliberate on the verdict. Before doing so, the judge pointed out 3 main questions to the jury. They had to decide who should be believed, Julie Mugford or Jeremy Bamber. It was also important to find out if they were convinced that Sheila did not commit the crime. The judge emphasized that this issue was linked to another important question. Was the second fatal shot fired at Sheila fired with a silencer? If the answer is yes, that eliminated the possibility that she could have committed the shot. Finally, was a call from Neville Bamber to his son actually made in the middle of the night? The absence of such a call undermined Jason's entire version of events. On October 28th, after more than 9 hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously found Jason Bamber guilty by a majority vote of 10-2, the minimum required for conviction. He was sentenced to 5 life sentences in prison without parole. Home Secretary Douglas Hurd ruled in 1988 that Bamber should not be released. The case remains a matter of controversy. Despite there being no direct evidence that Jeremy Bamber is guilty, he is serving his sentence. There is a belief that there may have been a miscarriage of justice, and the true culprit is his sister Sheila. Bamber insists on his innocence by filing appeals. His lawyer argues that the judgment was biased because of Jeremy's aggressive behavior in court. Jeremy Bamber believes that there is no evidence of his guilt, and there are many unexplained points in the case. Tests on Sheila's hands were not conducted. There was police misconduct at the scene, and there remains speculation of retaliation by Jeremy's ex-girlfriend. A trial was held in 1991 at Bamber's request, but in 1996, a police officer destroyed much of the physical evidence. Jeremy's defense team called it a disgrace. In 1997, a DNA test was conducted that showed the presence of Sheila and June's blood in the silencer, but the results were complicated and ambiguous. In 2012, Gun experts from the US and UK argued that the injuries on the bodies were not consistent with the use of a silencer. In 2015, Jeremy Bamber filed an appeal demanding that all evidence be turned over to the defense, under the guise of a lawyer, for which he was sentenced to an additional 14 years in prison for fraud. Seeking proof of his innocence, Bamber set up websites to discuss the case and offered a large reward for evidence that could overturn his conviction. The Bamber family's case continues to attract public attention and raise doubts about the correctness of the verdict. What do you think about it? Is Jeremy guilty? Still with me? Good, that means you're ready for the rest. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more cases just like this one. The case of Luz Maria Lopez, from love to violent crime. The crime rate in Guatemala is extremely high. According to statistics, at least 100 crimes are committed here per week, half of which are so-called domestic crimes, and almost 70% of serious crimes remain unsolved. According to The New Yorker, fewer civilians died in the Iraq war zone in 2009 than in Guatemala. It was in this beautiful but dangerous country that the tragic events that will be discussed today took place. The story of an attractive young woman named Luz Maria Lopez started out romantic and promising, but ended up as a handful of ashes in a bag thrown down a sewer manhole. She was victimized by a domestic tyrant whom she herself spent years forgiving over and over again, giving him a chance to mend his ways. There was a lot of controversy in this case, and the perpetrator could have avoided responsibility, but let's go over everything in order. Who is Luz Maria Lopez? The full name of our today's heroine, given to her at birth, sounds like Luz Maria del Rocio Morales Lopez. She was born in 1995, March 17th, in the small town of San Cristobal, Verapaz, in a simple and rather modest family of Ada Morales and Brian Lopez. Luz Maria was the youngest of 2 children of her parents, and was raised with her older brother Omar. As an infant, the girl nearly died due to an intestinal obstruction. To save her life, a complex operation was performed, and doctors gave no guarantees. But the baby's mother prayed for her recovery, and believed that her daughter would recover. So soon it happened, and the surgery itself, at such an early age, fortunately did not affect the development of the girl. During her school years, Luz Maria was actively engaged in sports, in particular attended sections of gymnastics and athletics, and was also fond of classical choreography. She was a creative person, easily found a common language with different people and quickly made friends. The girl also studied well and had an aptitude for the humanities. After graduating from school, Luz Maria thought about getting a higher education and decided to enter a prestigious state university. She chose law and later decided to specialize in criminalistics, because this direction has always aroused her genuine interest. A fateful encounter when Luz Maria was a student. She and her mother visited a car dealership in Coban, the capital of Alta Verapaz. It was her older brother's 25th birthday that year, and her parents and sister wanted to give him a special gift, a motorcycle, which he had long dreamed of. In the showroom they were met by a polite and very attentive young consultant, who introduced himself as Jorge. He showed the buyers the whole assortment and gave some recommendations. Mother and daughter chose a model, but decided to think more and consult with the head of the family. Leaving, they took a business card of the car dealership, and also Luz Maria left her phone number for feedback. Soon the girl received a call from Jorge, the same consultant from the salon, but the conversation was not about the upcoming purchase, but was more of a personal nature. After that, Jorge dialed Luz Maria's number several more times before he dared to ask her out to a coffee shop. It was obvious that he liked the beautiful, sultry brunette very much, but he did not know where to begin the acquaintance. It should be noted that Luz Maria also liked this handsome young man, so on his proposal to meet, she responded with consent. The guy was a year younger than her, but such a small difference in age was not an obstacle for them. Almost immediately a romantic relationship began between them, which developed rapidly. Both felt that it was true love at first sight, and believed that a long and happy life was ahead of them. After only a few months, the couple decided to live together, and although their parents did not approve of such a rush, the young people were soon married. About 6 months later, the lovers played a wedding, inviting only the closest people to the celebration. Curiously, the problems began on the day of the wedding, when the institution where the banquet was to be held. There was a hitch, because of which the holiday was almost derailed. The couple had to overpay a considerable amount of money so that the wedding, after all, took place at the appointed time. Who is Jorge? About who was the chosen one of Luz Maria, there is very little information in the public domain. It is known that he was born in 1996, in the town of Santa Catalina La Tinta, which is in the central part of Guatemala. Jorge was the eldest of 2 sons, and was raised with his brother Pablo. His family balanced on the brink of poverty, so that the boys as children were not spoiled with beautiful clothes and expensive toys, because the money was enough only for the bare necessities. But Jorge somehow did not aspire to a better life, so he did not bother to study and look for a decent job. The young man, as they say, just went with the flow. People who knew Jorge personally spoke about him as a withdrawn, uncommunicative, and sometimes aggressive guy. He really had problems with controlling emotions, because of which Jorge did not have many friends, and poorly formed relationships with the opposite sex. Nevertheless, when he met the girl of his dreams, he made every effort to win her love. And then he was in a hurry to get married, fearing that she might change her mind. By the way, the parents of Luz Maria from the very beginning treated her son-in-law with suspicion. There was something about this young man they definitely did not like, but they could not say what it was, and could not dissuade their daughter from marrying him. An unhappy marriage. Soon after the wedding, the young wife became pregnant, but since she had not yet managed to get a university degree, she could not find a good job. No one wanted to take a girl with no experience, who was in an interesting position, so she had to make do with casual labor. Her husband by that time had lost his job, but was in no hurry to burden himself with a new occupation. When the couple had a daughter, who was named Alice, with money in the family was quite tight. Both spouses were unemployed, they had no money not only to pay for rented housing, but even to buy food and the most basic things needed in the household. Then Jorge convinced his wife that the only way out for them would be to temporarily move to live in his parents' house. Luz Maria refused for a long time, but since they had no choice, and they could not stay on the street with a baby in their arms, the young woman eventually agreed. Ada knew about the problems in her daughter's family, and repeatedly persuaded her to return to her native home, but she persisted in saying that everything would soon get better with her husband, and there was no reason to worry. One day the mother decided to visit her daughter and granddaughter, but coming to the house of her son-in-law's parents, found there a frightening picture. Luz Maria was in a deplorable state. She ate only once a day and then a little. Jorge's family did not think it necessary to feed their unemployed daughter-in-law. Luz Maria was breastfeeding her young daughter, so malnutrition could affect not only her health, but also the health of the child. However, the meager food was only a small part of all the troubles and problems Luz Maria faced in her mother-in-law's home. As it turned out, there she was constantly humiliated and even beaten by her husband's younger brother. This guy was annoyed by the crying of the child, as well as the presence of children's things in the house, so much so that he repeatedly threw them at Luz Maria, and once again launched a baby bottle at her and hit little Alice, who was in her mother's arms. Jorge saw all this, but never once stood up for his wife and daughter, and acted as if they were strangers to him. Ada convinced her daughter to take her granddaughter and return to her parents' house, but soon Jorge appeared on their doorstep, asking his wife to return, and promising to get a job. She agreed, but only after the young people were able to rent an apartment and live separately from Jorge's parents. When Luz Maria defended her diploma, she was able to fulfill her long-time dream and got a job in the city prosecutor's office. A smart, talented, and very responsible young woman. She quickly gained the respect of her colleagues and gradually began to move up the career ladder. Over time, the family's financial situation improved considerably, so much so that the couple could afford to buy a car for 2. However, this was solely the merit of the wife, who worked hard, spared no expense, and was well regarded by her superiors. Jorge was still in search of himself, and preferred to live at the expense of his wife, jealous, lazy, and a domestic tyrant. The young husband had an explosive temper, and the situation only worsened with time. He did not want to work, interrupted by temporary part-time jobs, and even then, not often. He preferred to sit at home in front of the TV, drinking beer with friends, and spending what his wife earned. In addition, Jorge was pathologically jealous and tried to control every move of his beloved. He did not allow her to make friends, to have lunch with colleagues in cafes, or just to be somewhere without him. He constantly checked her phone, looked at the history of calls and read messages, and also forbade her to register accounts in social networks. At home, when left alone, the husband behaved no better. He made scandals in the middle of nowhere, constantly clarified relations, and always blamed his wife for all the problems and family troubles. When they lived in the house of his parents, Jorge never stood up for his wife, and just watched how she humiliated, insulted, and sometimes even beat his relatives. Jorge himself also occasionally gave the will of his fists, and did not see anything wrong in it. He treated Luz Maria as his property, believing that she would endure everything and would not go anywhere from him. Neighbors often heard the screams coming from the house of the couple, as well as saw on the face and body of the young woman signs of beatings. Repeatedly, Lopez tried to leave her husband and wanted to file for divorce. She several times took her daughter and moved out of the rented apartment in the house of her parents, but her husband every time came there, and literally on his knees begged her forgiveness, and each time Luz Maria forgave him, giving him another chance, even though her parents asked her to come to her senses and leave this abusive man. On December 15, 2020, after another fight with manhandling, Luz Maria took 3-year-old Alice, got into the car, and came to her mother in tears. A day later, Jorge arrived there, and it was unclear whether he wanted his wife or the car back. He said that he had found a job, and now their lives would change, and he also swore that he would never raise a hand on his wife again in his life. Surprisingly, Luz Maria believed him again, and went with her husband to their rented apartment. In mid-January 2021, Luz Maria called her mother to complain that her husband had not only failed to get a job as promised, but had also stolen the money she had earned, effectively leaving the family destitute. Ada felt sorry for her daughter, and said she would give her some money so that she and her granddaughter would have enough for everything they needed until her daughter received her salary. The women agreed to meet on the morning of January 19th, but Luz Maria did not arrive at the appointed time. Moreover, she did not answer phone calls and messages, which was unusual for her. Concerned, Ada decided to go to her daughter's workplace the next day, but there she learned that Luz Maria had not shown up for the second day, and that no one had been able to contact her. At the same time, Jorge, who was also looking for his wife, arrived at the prosecutor's office. According to him, they had once again quarreled, and he thought that Luz Maria had gone to her mother's house and was not answering her calls because she was offended by him. Ada immediately sensed something wrong, and assumed that her son-in-law was lying. So she went straight to the police so that the search for Luz Maria could begin as soon as possible. That same day, an alert system was announced nationwide under the codename Isabel Claudina. In the original alerta Isabel Claudina, this meant an emergency search for a young woman reported missing. When the massive search began, the missing woman's husband was the first person to be named as a suspect, although it would be more accurate to say that he was the only suspect in the case. Luz Maria had no enemies. There was no reason to believe that she had been kidnapped, and the last person who saw her alive was Jorge. Naturally, this guy denied his involvement in the case, claiming that he himself was knocked down in search of his wife and now extremely indignant and annoyed by the fact that he became the main suspect. At the same time, he himself was constantly confused in his testimony and could not clearly explain why he did not inform the police about the disappearance on the day of his wife's disappearance, and if he thought that she was at his mother-in-law's house, why he did not call or go there. While the police were searching for witnesses and combing the area, the body of the missing Luz Maria was accidentally discovered by municipal workers. On January 22nd, several workers arrived to a call about a clogged storm drain near the road. When they lifted the grate, they saw a strange large plastic bag with something black in it. As they looked closer, they realized that what they were looking at were charred human remains. They immediately reported the gruesome discovery to the police, and the police officers who arrived suggested that the body found could be that of Luz Maria Lopez, who was wanted all over the country. Forensic experts confirmed that the remains belonged to a young woman and her parents and brother at the identification, despite the fact that the body was badly disfigured by fire, confirmed with certainty that it was her. It is noteworthy that the package was found on the same street where the building of the prosecutor's office, where the deceased worked, was located, except that there were no surveillance cameras as well as lighting in that place. Despite the fact that the body was badly burned, pathologists were able to establish that the woman was severely beaten and the cause of her death was asphyxia. This was evidenced by internal hemorrhages, several fractures sustained while she was still alive, and particles of caked blood in her nose and mouth. There were deep marks on her neck indicating strangulation. It was a strange message. At the time of the discovery of the body, no new suspects had emerged in the case, and the victim's parents had no doubt that it was the son-in-law who had so brutally murdered their daughter. Jorge was immediately taken into custody and the motive for his heinous act was being investigated. Also, psychologists criminalists had to analyze in detail this marriage and the relationships formed within the family. At the investigation, Ada Lopez provided a frightening audio recording, which was sent to her anonymously by someone who lived in the neighborhood with her daughter and son-in-law. Apparently, this person has repeatedly witnessed the family scandals of the couple, and this time decided to record their quarrel, not suspecting that everything will end in a brutal murder. The audio recording clearly shows Luz Maria desperately screaming and crying for help, while in the background little Alice sobs in the background. Ada was horrified by what she heard. She stated that if that witness had called the police right away, her daughter might be alive right now. The man who made the recording not only did not call the police, but did not even visit the house from which the horrible screams were coming. The police also failed to trace the anonymous person, so it was not possible to involve him in the investigation as a witness. The audio recording was attached to the materials of the criminal case, and Ada gave a big interview, during which she called on all citizens to be vigilant and report to the police about the revealed facts of domestic violence, and not just to film them on camera or record them on a dictaphone. According to the woman, such simple actions will help save someone's life. This high-profile crime caused a widespread public outcry, and thousands of people took to the streets, staging rallies across the country to demand that the killer be punished. Although Jorge was taken into custody almost immediately, he continued to deny his guilt, saying that he personally drove his wife to work that fateful day, after which she disappeared. Street CCTV footage did indeed show the couple's car traveling in the direction of Luz Maria's workplace that morning. However, due to the tinted windows, it could not be clearly established how many people were in the car. Also, none of the recordings showed the car stopping and Luz Maria getting out of the cabin. The next curious discovery was made at the couple's rented home, where numerous washed-out traces of blood and drag marks were found. This suggested that this was where the brutal crime had taken place. Suspicions were confirmed when microscopic fragments of burnt flesh were found in the trunk of the family car. In addition, during the search, the investigator was interested in the recent purchase made by the couple, namely, a double orthopedic mattress. More precisely, not even the mattress itself, but the dense polyethylene in which it was wrapped. As the comparative analysis showed, it was in it that Jorge had packed the burnt remains of his wife. It was also possible to find several witnesses from among the neighbors of the family, who repeatedly heard Jorge insulting his wife and threatening her with death. A few days before Luz Maria's sudden disappearance, her husband had shouted that he would kill her if she decided to leave him, and that he would hide her body so that no one would ever find it. The picture of the crime based on the data that managed to collect expert criminologists, as well as relying on the testimony of several witnesses, the investigation of the pieces restored the gruesome picture of the crime. The murder occurred on the night of January 19, 2021, the day before the spouses had a big fight, and Jorge again gave the will of his fists. He had problems with controlling outbursts of anger before, but this time he simply went into a rage. He hit his wife several times, causing her to scream and cry for help. It was these screams that the neighbors of the family heard, but did not call the police. In the process of beating, Jorge broke his wife's nose and also caused her a head injury. After that, he strangled her with his bare hands and then attempted to dispose of the corpse. To do so, he dragged the body out into the backyard, doused it with campfire liquid, and set it on fire. However, Jorge did not expect his funeral pyre to be so smoky and the stench of burning meat and hair to eat away at his eyes. He was afraid that the neighbors would notice it, suspect something wrong, and call the fire department or the police. So he quickly put out the fire, wrapped the burnt remains in plastic, and then went to find a secluded place where he thought the body would never be found. The most horrible thing was that Jorge committed all these atrocities in front of their young daughter, who, due to her age, although not fully, but understood what was happening. The child, who was 3.5 years old at the time, saw the beating and the crime, as evidenced by the child's cries and screams, which were also caught on tape. Jorge, who had some knowledge of forensics thanks to his wife's textbooks, which were in abundance in their home, tried to cover up the crime and establish an alibi. He found a stretch of road where there were no lights or video cameras, and dumped his wife's body in a drainage sewer there, going unnoticed. The next morning he drove to her place of work along the usual route, as if he had driven Luz Maria there, as he did every morning, and the next day he began to simulate an active search for his wife, calling her colleagues, acquaintances, and relatives. Trial and verdict. The criminal's lawyers delayed the trial as much as they could, and also tried to throw the investigation off track. They insisted that all the evidence and witness statements were circumstantial, and there was not a single piece of evidence that would unequivocally prove Jorge's guilt. Defense attorneys tried to get the detention changed to house arrest, and also argued that Jorge himself was deeply depressed by the fact that he was accused of killing the woman he loved and the mother of his child. However, the decisive evidence was the data obtained from Luz Maria's phone. All this time the gadget was in her husband's possession, and on the first day after the crime he sent from it several messages to different people, trying to create the appearance that Luz Maria is alive. Also, having tracked all the movements of the smartphone that day, it was clear that it was constantly in the same places as Jorge's phone. But the lawyers tried to turn this evidence in favor of their client, saying that he found his wife's phone and drove around the city with it in search of her. But no one could explain why Jorge was sending messages from it, as well as calling it from his own cell phone. Another proof of the defendant's guilt was the bruises and scratches on his body, found on the day of his arrest. These marks were recorded by experts on photos, and indicated that the victim had clearly resisted. The most vivid was a scratch on his neck, but only defined particles of Jorge's epithelium under the fingernails of the murdered could not be found, because they were destroyed by fire. But despite the large number of controversial points, the prosecutor asked for the maximum possible punishment for the perpetrator. Court hearings and proceedings were repeatedly postponed due to the raging worldwide pandemic of coronavirus. But in October 2022, the defendant was finally found guilty of the brutal murder of his wife. The man was sentenced to 50 years in prison, although he himself did not admit his guilt. Custody of little Alice was given to her maternal grandparents, who admitted that now the main meaning of their lives is their granddaughter. On Saturday morning, August 19, 2017, Norberta Gray Wind looked at her 22-year-old pregnant daughter struggling to climb the stairs to her third-floor neighbor's apartment complex. Savannah was 8 months pregnant. August had been unusually hot, and she could barely walk on her swollen legs. A few hours later, William Hawn, the boyfriend of Brooke Cruz, the same neighbor who had invited Savannah over, came up the same stairs. When he entered the apartment, he found Brooke scrubbing the bathroom, Savannah's bloody, shredded body lying on the floor, and a basin with a baby in it on top of the toilet lid. Upon seeing William, Brooke picked up the infant and held it out to him with the words, "This is our baby. This is our family. Please help me." Against any healthy logic, William helped clean up the blood, carry bags of bloody towels and clothes out of the apartment, wrap bags around Savannah's body, securing them with duct tape and ropes, and later dispose of the corpse. Today's story is about the tragic intersection of the lives of two contrasting couples. The dark one, with a sticky, heavy, irresponsible, and unhealthy past defining their present, and the light one, loving, easy, and open. The result, broken families and the death that accompanied the birth. The day after the deed, William Hawn announced to his co-workers that his spouse had given birth to a little girl named Phoenix. In some macabre irony, the couple who took Savannah's life and daughter away from her named the child after the mythological bird with the ability to die and be reborn. Later in the interview, Brooke's boyfriend would describe his days with Hazley, as her family would call the girl, as beautiful days. That baby made me a happy little family man for 2 days. It's been great. I never thought I'd ever experience that again. Savannah Gray Wind was born on August 9, 1995 in Burke County, North Dakota. Savannah's father is an ordinary white American, and her mother is from the Spirit Lake Sioux Indian tribe. The girl had 2 brothers, Joy and Casey, and a younger sister, Kayla. The parents, Norberta and Joe, were very proud of their children. The family lived in Fargo, North Dakota until Savannah was 9 years old. Then in 2005, they moved to Spirit Lake Reservation, Spirit Lake, a Native American Indian place in the eastern part of the state. Savannah adored nature and animals, especially horses. On the reservation, the girl met Ashton Mayton. The couple met when Savannah was 15 years old, and since then, they have not parted. When it was time for the young people to go to college, the family moved back to Fargo. Savannah found a job caring for the elderly at a nursing home, studying to become a nurse and preparing to take the exam in September. By this time, Savannah was a happy young woman expecting her firstborn. She and Ashton had found an apartment, put down a deposit, and planned to move into their own family nest in early September. For now, Savannah was staying with her parents on the bottom floor of a 7-unit, 3-story apartment building. It was in this building on the 3rd floor that 38-year-old Brooke Cruz and 33-year-old William Hone rented an apartment. No one is born evil. A person is the result of experiences that make them who they are. Brooke Cruz has created a woman within herself capable of such gruesome murder. Wanting to find wholeness through accepting all sides of her personality, she nurtured a dark side step by step that she couldn't control. Perhaps there are 2 different personalities within each of us, darkness and light. I believe we are predestined to have dark and light thought processes that manifest as personalities. One of them is socially destroyed quite early on, but is that a good thing? Brooke wrote in one of her pieces, "Ever since she was a child, Brooke was drawn to mysticism and found a special beauty in the crimes of serial killers and high IQ maniacs. As an adult, she had already studied the psychology of criminals professionally and strived to learn to think like them so she could understand them. Brooke said that if Ted Bundy came to see her, she would definitely help him. But Brooke Cruz, alas, was not a healthy, stable person herself. All the lived information was downloaded into the personality, which was characterized by impulsive behavior, anxious avoidance, irascibility, frequent changes of partners and places of work, inability to finish what she had started. The young woman tried to fight it, made discipline lists, and even followed them for a while, but eventually fell off again. By the time she was 38, she was overwhelmed by depression, physical illness, exhaustion from unhealthy relationships that included regular physical abuse, and a disturbing fear of losing her partner because she couldn't get pregnant and give birth. Brooke couldn't take it anymore. Darkness and light mingled. Killing a pregnant woman was seen as one way to get the infant she wanted. After her arrest, Brooke's apartment was left with a stack of books ranging from clinical, criminal, forensic, and legal psychology to obstetrics. In a desk drawer, she found notes listing birthing kit items such as scissors, blades, clamps and gloves, an infant cardiopulmonary resuscitation bag, and the hormone oxytocin. Brooke Lynn Cruz grew up in Florida's Bradenton, Sarasota neighborhood, where her mother, Paula Nelson, still lives, according to Christmas cards. Her parents divorced and 7 children, including Brooke, were left to live with their mother, according to the recollections of one of her sisters. The family lived quite well, according to diary entries Brooke kept throughout her later life. She had a difficult childhood, which she tries hard to forget. Transition age changed the caring, open-minded girl, made her testy but not aggressive. Brooke became a troubled teenager, and she was the only one of all the children who decided to move in with her father, whom her mother called a professional criminal. Life with her father didn't work out, and she found herself in and out of foster homes. From that point on, the siblings pretty much lost touch with Brooke. They only learned that Brooke is the mother of at least 7 children from a news story about a shocking crime. At the age of 15, Brooke met Aaron Edwards. In 1995, when she was about 17, she gave birth to a child in Pinellas County, Florida, left the infant with the father and moved away. A court ordered the mother to pay child support, but Brooke did not honor the court order. She will remember her daughter when she turns 14, and their communication will be limited to a few Facebook messages. In the evenings, Brooke worked as a waitress at the Chinese Dragon restaurant and as a sales representative and animal specialist at the Petland Pet Store in Bradenton, Florida. In early 2002, Brooke, 23, was jailed in Missouri for falsifying documents but was released on parole. On August 31, 2002, she was arrested again and sent to jail in Hidalgo County, Texas for parole violation. In 2006, at the age of 27, Brooke married Carl Cruz, a carpenter from Minnesota. The young woman managed to give birth to 2 children and worked as an administrative assistant in her husband's carpentry shop. The marriage, in which Brooke cheated on her husband, lasted only 3 years. The couple divorced in June 2009. The custody of the children, according to the documents, became the father, and Brooke left for California without explanation. The only thing she did carefully and diligently throughout her life was to keep diaries and record all the events that happened to her. After the terrible crime, the entries became available to the press. The diaries told of a string of lovers, home births, and abortions. There was a common point in all the stories. The relationships began with heart-shaped marks around the edges, but after a while, the entries about the men changed. Each of them started playing intellectual games with me, making me feel that I wasn't good enough, not smart enough, Brooke wrote. It's impossible to say with certainty whether Brooke chose such guys on purpose or whether any of her relationships went through such trials as a result of internal problems. However, she absolutely believed that Carl was bullying her and making her look like a bad, promiscuous mother, and this fact was perceived by her as emotionally traumatizing. However, despite this perception, she returns to her now ex-husband's house after a trip to California, registers on a dating site, and begins to study psychology in earnest. On the dating site tagged, the young woman meets Andrew Murray, a chef from Katoomba, New South Wales, Australia, and decides to move to Australia in late 2011. In January 2012, in an argument that erupted over a child custody issue, Brooke grabbed a knife and attacked her ex-husband. Police arrested the woman and filed criminal charges. Brooke denied the knife attack, but chose not to wait for a court hearing and fled to Australia on false immigration papers, where she married Andrew. The Australian marriage lasted exactly 6 months. Andrew found out about her American past, husband, children, and fake immigration papers. After discovering the truth, his wife, according to Andrew, began threatening him with arrest for aiding and abetting, causing him to even go to the police and tell them everything just in case. The marriage is remembered by Andrew for the huge amount of talk about maniacs. He would later reveal that as early as 2012, Brooke was already obsessed with crime. She studied psychology and nursing, did her thesis on serial killers from her words. She was always reading books about maniacs and crime and could tell you anything about them. I thought she became more and more aggressive as time went on. In total, it took 6 months and 10 days from the time she arrived until she returned to the US in October 2012. On September 22, 2012, Brooke made a diary entry where she wrote that she had changed significantly for the better. After returning from Australia, she was engaged in a lengthy custody battle for her 2 children. She may have had a chance for a new life if she reconciled with Andrew Murray. But in late 2012, Brooke met 28-year-old William Hone, who had been convicted of child abuse a few months earlier after he brought his son to the hospital in January 2011 with a fractured skull near his right ear. Brooke falls in love with this guy who is twice divorced, has 2 kids, doesn't pay child support, has anger issues, and a court order for no contact with his children. Brooke is full of energy and desire to be her new self, take the kids and take steps in that direction, and finds a job. In 2013, Brooke turns a hobby into a profession and enrolls at Minnesota State University in Moorhead, where she takes courses such as social behavior, physiological psychology, cognitive theory, psychology of deviant behavior, and directed research. She is particularly interested in the psychology of serial killers. The newly minted student wrote a paper on them and received the highest grade. Only her personal life clouds the picture. The relationship with William began beautifully. We have such a relationship with him, which is nice for children. We're loving. We don't yell at each other. We're affectionate and kind, Brooke said. But over time, the relationship turned into codependency, the joint use of alcohol and illegal substances. Brooke thought she was doing well, but felt worse and worse. She started avoiding her children, changed jobs because she couldn't get along with the staff, and became more and more immersed in her psychological research into the darker sides of humanity. On December 23, 2014, she lost her custody battle. Judge Waldemar of the Otter Tail County Courthouse granted temporary sole physical and sole legal custody of the children to their father, Carl. That same day, Brooke suffered a panic attack and was taken to the hospital emergency room with a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, according to medical records. Years later, after her trial for the murder, she would say it was the events in 2014 that were the turning point in her life when she lost the ability to control her impulses and evaluate her actions. But what those events were, Brooke did not elaborate. In January 2015, in her diary will appear entry. I feel like I started this relationship with a purse full of love coins, and slowly but surely this purse is empty and I just have nothing to give. Our intimacy is not the same as before. About once a week he makes time for me. The intimacy lasts about 7 to 15 minutes. He doesn't care at all about my satisfaction. Brooke complained of inattention and became increasingly withdrawn. 5 months later, she was diagnosed with gallbladder disease and physical and psychological deterioration set in. Brooke practically stopped leaving the house. In May 2016, police responded to a call. William Hahn had brutally beaten his girlfriend in the bathroom. He pleaded guilty to assault and was banned from approaching Brooke. 6 months later, police came again on a neighbor's call and found Hahn in Brooke's apartment. He pleaded guilty to violating the restraining order. And then they got back together. And there was no longer a healthy moment in the relationship. Brooke was unable to have children after having an abortion in 2011. William, on the other hand, constantly demanded a child from her. In early 2017, after another fight, Brooke lied to Hahn about the pregnancy to keep him from leaving, and even emailed a fake ultrasound picture and a picture of a positive pregnancy test. She found a recording of some random baby's heartbeat online and showed it to her partner, saying it was the heartbeat of their future child. In August 2017, they had another big fight, by which time it was obvious that there was no pregnancy. But since William had already told everyone around about the future paternity and did not want to look like a laughingstock, he literally demanded a child from his girlfriend, mentioning the pregnant neighbor 3 floors below. Brooke Cruz would later tell police officers that she took William's demand as an ultimatum and a desire to take the baby away from Savannah. Even though he didn't say so directly, Brooke had medical knowledge, and she set about compiling a list of what she needed to induce labor. By now, she was used to anticipating and doing whatever her young lover wanted her to do. On a Saturday afternoon in August, Brooke knocked on the door of a downstairs apartment and offered Savannah $20 for serving as a model for a dress Brooke was supposedly sewing. Savannah accepted. Before going upstairs to her neighbor's apartment, Savannah ordered a pizza, expecting to grab a bite when she got home an hour later to drive her younger brother to work. The mom-to-be didn't return by the planned time. The brother went upstairs on his own around 2:30 in the afternoon. He heard the sound of a sewing machine, but no one opened the door. A few minutes later, Savannah's father, Joe, also went upstairs and knocked on the door. Brooke yelled out that they were still working on the dress. Savannah was trying it on, and that was why no one could come to the door. Norberta drove her son to work herself. When she returned home, she found the pizza untouched, texted her daughter a few times, and after getting no response, went upstairs. A neighbor opened the door and explained that Savannah had long since left as soon as they finished their fitting. An anxious Norberta went downstairs to her apartment and looked around. Her shoes, purse, car keys, and belongings were all left in the apartment. Savannah couldn't go for a walk because the heat and swelling made it painful and difficult for her to walk. Norberta called Ashton, hoping he was the one who had picked up her daughter. But the young man replied that she wasn't answering him either. The worried mother called the police and began driving around the streets looking for her pregnant daughter, who may have suddenly become ill. I was driving and I thought, well, if she had gone somewhere, I would have found her nearby, but deep down I knew she hadn't gone anywhere. Later that day, police searched Brooke and William's apartment because it was Savannah's last known location. The landlady welcomed them in and did not obstruct them, but the police, lacking a warrant, did not look in closets or behind closed doors. The police department explained to the family that Savannah was of age and old enough to make her own decisions without informing family members. Because there was no evidence that any crime had occurred in or near the home, investigators concluded that the young woman had gone somewhere voluntarily. Savannah's family saw the indifference with which the department's officers were working, and it was very upsetting to them. The police returned to search the apartment 2 more times and came out empty-handed. William Hahn would later testify that during one of the searches, he hid the infant in a suitcase and Savannah's body in a dresser, from which all the shelves had been removed. 2 days after the brutal murder, the couple would drive the dresser with Savannah's body to a bridge over the Red River and dump it in the water. On August 23, 2017, William's co-workers told police that he had blabbed about having a baby at home. That same day, residents of the apartment building heard a baby crying from apartment #5 and immediately notified police. The information received allowed the officers to obtain a warrant and return to the familiar apartment already, with a serious thorough search during which a live newborn baby girl was found. Brooke didn't hold back and revealed that Savannah herself had given her the baby 2 days after her disappearance. According to her, Savannah didn't want this baby, and that day when she came to help with sewing a dress, she asked Brooke how she could induce labor on her own. Then she left and showed up 2 days later at 3 a.m. with the baby in her arms and handed him to Brooke. The couple was arrested and Savannah was reported missing. The baby was taken to a local hospital and placed in the temporary custody of Cass County Social Services. A few days later, a DNA test confirmed parentage, and the girl was reunited with her father. For 3 more days, police and hundreds of local residents combed the valley looking for Savannah. Please check your property, buildings, garages, outbuildings for any signs of entry or any indication that someone has been there. Landlords, please check your vacant apartments that you may have for any signs of entry or evidence that someone has been there. If you are willing to check your dumpsters, we ask the public to help with that, Chief Todd said at the press conference. On August 27th, 8 days after Savannah's disappearance, fishermen came across a body wrapped in plastic on the Red River near Harwood. Savannah was identified by a tattoo on her leg that read, "Too beautiful for Earth." On August 28th, Brooke Cruz and William Hone were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to kidnap, and providing false information to police. The couple began to confess. Brooke said she instigated the altercation by accusing pregnant Savannah of stealing mail and mistreating her cat. The verbal argument turned into a physical scuffle and Brooke pushed her. Savannah, falling, hit her head on the bathroom sink and lost consciousness. Brooke then took a knife and removed the baby, making a cut from hip to hip. Savannah went in and out of consciousness as she did so. Under questioning, Brooke confirmed that William Hone did not know of the impending plan. According to her, William came home, went into the bathroom, saw Savannah and asked if she was alive. Brooke replied that she didn't know and asked for something to do. William left the bathroom briefly and then returned in his underwear, holding a rope, which he used to strangle Savannah. In doing so, he said that if she had been breathing up to this point, she was definitely dead now. Next, Brooke said, the 2 of them scrubbed the floor and walls and stuffed the lifeless body into a bathroom closet. When the police knocked on the door, Brooke tried to remain calm and not worry. The officers searched the apartment but couldn't find anything. They did not have a search warrant, so the search was superficial and the officers could not look in closets and dressers. According to the perpetrator, the child during both searches that day was under a blanket on their bed next to William. The girl was very calm and did not cry, so she was not discovered. At the time of the 3rd inspection, August 20th, the body had already been placed inside the dresser and the infant was hidden in a suitcase. In the early morning hours of August 21st, they took the dresser down the stairs and loaded it into their Jeep Cherokee, drove it to the river and disposed of it. William Hone denied participating in the crime. He admitted only to hiding the newborn baby girl and providing false information to law enforcement in order to cover up the crime. Brooke and William were set bail at $2 million, to which William remarked that it was an unrealistic and unreasonable amount for any ordinary person. Surprisingly, he apparently thought he deserved something reasonable after what he had done. Brooke Cruz was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. William's participation in the crime was not proven. During the trial, it was also revealed that Brooke's cellmate named Jennifer Robinson testified against her. According to the inmate's claim, Brooke mentioned that she was the one who strangled Savannah with a rope because she learned about Savannah and William's affair and thought that Savannah's child might have come from him. On September 28, 2018, a jury acquitted William, finding him not guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. However, on October 30, 2018, because he had pleaded guilty to kidnapping himself, he was sentenced to life in prison. The following spring, in May 2019, William appealed to the Supreme Court. On October 7, 2019, the sentencing review trial concluded. Judge Olson, who had originally sentenced William to life in prison, stated that despite the Supreme Court's dissent, he was still going to give him the harshest sentence possible at this time, which was 20 years in prison. Given that William has already spent 775 days behind bars, he will have to serve more than 17 more years of his 20-year sentence. Baby Hazley remained unharmed despite such an unnatural delivery. The girl is now 6 years old and goes to kindergarten. Savannah's parents and the girl's father share joint custody. The grandparents maintain a public Facebook page where they post updates on how the granddaughter is living and what she is doing. The case has become a high-profile case. Norberta is convinced that her daughter's disappearance was not taken seriously because Savannah was Native American. I feel that her disappearance was not taken as seriously as the disappearance of a white woman. I've lived in Fargo almost my whole life and I've seen how differently Native Americans are treated. After Savannah's death, Democratic Senator Heidi Heitkamp introduced a bill called Savannah's Law, which was signed into law in October 2020. The bill aims to combat violence against Native American women by improving collaboration between federal, state, and tribal authorities. Norberta commented on the passage of the bill, "It's sad that my daughter had to die for people to take Native Americans seriously." Parents can be very intrusive, arrogant, and demanding in their demands. Sometimes it brings some benefit and sometimes it does not. There are times when this demanding is even dangerous. Brett Ryan was in just such a situation. He grew up in a prosperous and large Canadian family where his parents Bill and Susan had 4 sons. It might seem that having so many children, and especially boys, is hard and exhausting parenting labor. But it wasn't for everyone. Their parents tried to teach the younger Ryans by example. Their father, in addition to his prestigious job at the Toronto Star Daily newspaper, had many hobbies such as sports, yoga, and psychology. And as for Susan, she was very hardworking and the whole family home rested on her shoulders. She not only gave her time to her husband and children, but also kept a huge house in a prestigious area of Toronto in perfect condition, and all this without the help of gardeners and craftsmen. Neighbors passing by the family home for a while lingered to admire the huge and blooming garden through the fence. Could not be said that Brett was the family favorite. No, Susan loved everyone equally, but from the outside it might have seemed that it was Brett who was scolded least of all for obedience. The thing was, he could always get out of any situation. Even when all the evidence pointed to his involvement, he found a way to prove that he was only partially involved. And amazingly, that ability helped him have a lot of friends. Yeah, Brett was pretty damn popular at school. Everyone wanted to be friends with him, or at least be able to say hello by the hand. Just like his older brothers, Brett went to university after high school. Brett always wanted to be better than his brothers. So he took out an ad in the newspaper offering Toronto residents a service to paint houses and fences. At first things were going really well. The young man had his first money. Susan was even proud of her son and always held him up as an example to others. But it's one thing when this money is a part-time job, and quite another when you drop out of university to spend all your free time breathing in the smell of paint and not having any education. Yes, after a while, Brett dropped out of university. While for the first couple of years Brett felt confident in front of his older brothers, after a while, When Christopher and Leland graduated and found jobs in their specialties, Brett's authority began to fade. Christopher worked for the City of Toronto Transit Commission, and Leland became the family artist and designer. After their studies, they moved out of their parents' home, and Brett, to avoid spending part of his earnings on rent, stayed with his father, mother, and younger brother, who attended a school for gifted children. With each passing year, Brett became more and more desperate. Because of his debts and inability to pay them off, he developed depression. By 2007, when Brett was already 26 years old, his debt had passed $60,000. Brett was considered a pretty smart guy, but he didn't know how to use his mind. At the same time, he did not show how bad he was. He always smiled, helped everyone, was a participant of volunteer movements. No one could believe how big the black hole in his soul was. Finally came that fateful moment when nothing could be done, at least not legally. On October 28, 2007, Brett had no orders for house painting or any other work around the house. Orders are always extremely scarce in the fall. Everyone who wanted to had already painted their houses in the spring or summer. Winter was approaching, from which you should not expect any big earnings. There was no time to wait for anything. Brett put on all the old clothes he had in his closet. A hat, a long sweater he'd gotten from his older brother, a scarf his mother had knitted. The scarf was comically long. Brett hadn't even worn it before, but finally the scarf came in handy. He wrapped it around his face, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes, and headed for the bank that was on the outskirts of his neighborhood. He was clutching some thick folder and limped playfully on his right foot. Brett waited his turn at the bank, and when he was finally summoned by an employee, he went up to her and told her in a quiet voice that he had a gun with him. He also told her to take all the money out of the bank's cash register and give it to him, otherwise he would shoot here and the first person he would kill would be her. The girl with trembling hands handed him all the cash she had in the cash register, and Brett quietly walked out of the building so as not to attract the attention of the guards. And when he was on the street, he ran away. He counted the money he had stolen. It wasn't very much, a little over $1,000. To pay off his debts, he would have to rob about 60 banks. Sounds fantastic, but there was no other way out. The first few days, the novice robber feared that the police would somehow still be able to get to him, so he did not appear at home. He told his mother that he had an order in a neighboring town, and he himself spent the night in the car. Periodically, Brett crept up to his house to see if there was a police car in the bushes. No, it was quiet. No one was looking for him. That's good, so he's headed in the right direction. The first robbery was followed by a second, third, fourth. Brett changed clothes each time. He didn't wear his old clothes anymore. He bought them second-hand, or even found them in the trash. After the crime, he burned the used clothes. Brett also purchased a beard from a store that sold outfits for costume parties. The bank employees he threatened always noticed his beard, and later testified that the attacker was a bearded man. Toronto newspapers began publishing a number of articles about the robber, but the bearded robber never made a fortune in robberies. The maximum amount that could be stolen did not exceed $3,000. Finally, Brett had a misfire. The police spotted his car on the surveillance cameras and followed him all the way home. By that time, they still had no direct evidence of his guilt. It was decided to just follow the suspect. It was as if Brett sensed the outside surveillance and did not go on a robbery spree for the next 15 days. Although before that, the intervals between crimes were 3 or 4 days. The cops thought they were on the wrong trail and wasting their time suspecting an innocent guy, but finally, luck smiled on them. Brett left the house, got into a car, and later got out of the car not far from the bank, wearing a different, strange outfit. He went into the branch, stayed there for a while, but at the exit, he was met by the police to finally handcuff him and announce that the much-discussed bearded robber had finally been caught. Brett was under investigation for 7 months. He was charged with robbery with a firearm. Interestingly, despite having a gun permit, the bearded robber always came to the bank empty-handed. He didn't even have a kitchen knife with him. In total, he was charged with 19 counts and was sent to prison. From there, Brett, just like his family, filed multiple appeals. This yielded results. Only 8 of the 19 counts were upheld. But Brett didn't stop there. As soon as he had the opportunity to apply for parole, he took it. In his petition, Brett asked to take into account the fact that he went to these crimes being in a severe depression, caused by 2 failed relationships as well as a large amount of debt. At the same time, he once again noted that he went to the crimes without weapons, absolutely not planning to harm anyone. His remarks were accepted, but in order to get out of prison early, he had to undergo a session with a psychologist. The sessions had a positive effect on Brett. All the time he was behind bars, he did not communicate with his family, and now he himself has made a step towards getting closer and restoring relations with his family. The positive changes were noticed by the commissioners, so on November 24, 2010, Brett was released. This freedom, for which the young man fought so zealously, turned out to be very bitter and even harder than it was before. Who was Brett before? A painter with a heavy burden on his soul. What was he now? Brett the bank robber, Brett the ex-con. With such a tainted background, he was never hired by any company, and those who hired him for house painting services, as soon as they recognized him as the bearded robber, refused his services. Also the neighbors, yes, the same ones who used to praise Susan's garden and visit, now began to spread various unpleasant rumors. The whole Ryan family hastily sold the house and moved to Scarborough. Susan started growing her new garden again, and Brett did get a job with a trading company, but his pay was not high. His parents were also helping him with money to rebuild his university education. Brett still visited a psychologist, and each time the specialist advised him the same thing: don't break the connection with your family. The psychologists really worked. Despite this, Brett's financial well-being left much to be desired. In September 2011, the first happy accident in his life happened. He met Kristen Baxter. Kristen was just a fantastic girl. She had her own apartment, the windows of which overlooked the sea, thanks to which the young couple opened a beautiful landscape. She was engaged in sports, which allowed her to keep her body in shape, and most importantly, she did not care about Brett's past. They also traveled periodically as a couple, and had even been to Australia. Brett's father and mother, watching his relationship with the girl develop, were very happy. In addition, they were sure that their son will finally take his head, and Kristen will push him in every possible way to develop and finally take his place in society. Brett felt that life was starting to get better, but there was an unfortunate event that was out of his control, and that disrupted the building of a new phase. Brett's father died. For him, it was a real shock. His depressive state began to return, because of which Brett began to visit a psychologist more often. He also had to spend a lot of time with his mother and help her with money, which he already had a little. A long relationship with Kristen had to be developed. Young people were not teenagers, which is enough just to meet and spend free time together. Being madly in love with this enchanting blonde, Brett decided to take a serious step. He had some savings, plus he talked to his mother and said that he wanted to build a family with Kristen. And to do this, he needed to make her an offer that Kristen could not refuse him and remember this day for the rest of her life. Susan realized what her son was getting at and gave him money to buy a ring. It should be noted that the couple had discussed their future before that. And no, Kristen didn't need some expensive gift or something like that. It was enough for her to get a proposal from Brett as a confirmation of his serious intentions, but he still decided to splurge and bought a gold ring with a huge diamond for his beloved. Kristen, of course, told him yes. Then, as is usually the case, the young people began planning their wedding. Brett agreed with all of Kristen's decisions and nodded approvingly, but he was horrified at how expensive it was and how much he needed to think about his job. He found an engineering job opening for a large technology company on the internet, put together a resume, and responded to it. He even had a successful interview and was accepted. Brett was happy at the time. He immediately excited his fiancée and his mother with this news, from whom he again asked for money to buy himself an expensive suit to wear to work. Once again, his mother did not refuse her son. When the suit was already bought, Brett received a call from the company saying that they had to refuse him because the security service had found out about his criminal past. For Brett, it was like thunder that broke over him. His mood began to plummet immediately and he finally gave up. Why waste time on this endless series of interviews waiting for answers, if in the end no one wants to hire a criminal even if corrected? And most importantly, why waste time studying? Brett decided that it would be better to spend the money his mother and older brothers gave him for his university studies on his wedding to Kristen. And so he did. Brett was back in the situation he had recently gotten out of. He didn't tell his family that he had dropped out of university, and most importantly, he didn't tell his counselor. He also didn't tell anyone that he had been turned down for an engineering job. He put on a shirt, tie, suit, and went to paint houses, changing into a change of clothes right on the way, and told his relatives that he was working in an office. In addition, in his social networks, Brett constantly posted various photos from the office, or from some business event, of course, previously downloaded from the internet. And also being near his loved ones, he often pretended as if his phone was ringing and he urgently needed to solve some work issues. He was very skillful at making dust in his eyes, and no one would have thought that Brett was actually a common painter. In September 2016, after a 5-year relationship with Kristen, Brett planned to have a wedding. He even agreed to rent an expensive restaurant, where it was necessary to pay $100 for each guest. The whole Ryan family was very happy, because Brett finally took himself in hand, has a prestigious job, lives in a fancy apartment, and he has a stunning bride. But they had no idea that Brett's lies had gone too far, and there was no way to get out of it unscathed. By then, the wedding was only a month away, and the event required an investment. Our hero again and again borrowed money from his mother, and when he realized that she was no longer able to help him, he literally demanded that she change her job to a better paying one. Also, he planned a bachelor party in August, to which he invited all his friends and brothers. As the fuse of this bombshell began to burn out, Brett still decided to tell his counselor about everything. Brett had been lying to his family for a year about working for a technology company as an engineer. The psychologist was saddened that the guy he'd been leading for so long had gotten off the right track again, and said that Brett just needed to come clean to his mother. Brett thought about it for a long time, procrastinated, but eventually did so. His mother was insanely upset, because she had spent so long telling everyone what a wonderful son she had. She also demanded that Brett tell Kristen everything, because if he kept quiet, she would. She also warned her son that his brothers were already aware of the situation, and they were on her side. Brett couldn't do that. After all, he'd had such a hard time telling his mother the truth, and he couldn't tell Kristen about his lies. Yes, he knew that there was less than a month until the wedding, which wouldn't happen because of his lying, and indeed it would have been better for Kristen to know everything in advance, but he still kept quiet. It wasn't clear what Brett was counting on, and he also couldn't help thinking that his mother would really tell his fiancée everything, and then the scandal would be unavoidable. Brett flinched every time Kristen's phone rang, and even stopped breathing until he realized that it wasn't his mother calling, but another friend of his future wife, asking her about her wedding plans and giving her advice. Finally, he figured out how to silence his mother permanently. When Brett was convicted of robbery, he was forbidden to use firearms, so the boy decided that the best way to carry out his plan was to use a crossbow, and besides, it's a pretty silent murder weapon. One of his late father's hobbies was crossbow shooting in the garden at targets. He taught Brett how to shoot too. Yes, he was good at target shooting, except that it was unlikely his late father thought his son would use that skill in such a way. Brett bought the crossbow and arrows at a sporting goods store, and hid it behind the construction debris that lay in Susan's garage. At home, he arranged what he thought was an ingenious alibi invention. He tied a spoon to a fan and set the fan itself on a timer. When the timer went off, the fan turned on, and the spoon moved across the computer keyboard, sending pre-prepared comments to YouTube. From the outside, it must have looked like Brett had spent all day at home, watching videos and commenting on them. On the morning of August 25th, Brett dressed up in strange clothes that hid his face, left the house through the back door to avoid the security cameras, and took a train to his parents' house to get rid of anyone who might disrupt his and Kristen's well-being once and for all. Susan was very surprised at her son's unexpected arrival. She had not been feeling well that day, but Brett, despite his mother's condition, once again began to persuade her and even demand not to tell his future wife anything. The mother categorically refused him. Then he began to get angry, and Susan, sensing something wrong, seeing her son's mad eyes, warned him that she had already called Christopher and he was on his way to them. Brett was going crazy. He ran to the garage, got a crossbow, but his anger and adrenaline overflowed him with such force that he couldn't even make a shot. He just bludgeoned his mother with the butt of the gun, and finally, to be sure that she was finally dead, he tightened the rope around her neck. After throwing plastic bags over the body, Brett loaded the crossbow with arrows and hid in the bushes waiting for his brother to arrive. After a while, Christopher arrived, started calling for his mother or his brother, but in response was shot in the neck from behind, which caused him to die within a few minutes. The next victim was the youngest brother, Alexander. As it turns out, Susan managed to call him too. He was also shot in the neck, but either the arrow did not go deep or did not hit vital arteries. So Alexander did not die immediately but began to scream and call for help. All this time Leland was in the house, sleeping in his room on the second floor, and had no idea of the carnage that was going on in the garage and in the garden, and most importantly that it was his own brother who was committing the crime. His sleep was disturbed by a scream, and coming downstairs, Leland saw Brett trying to strangle Alexander. A fight broke out between Leland and Brett, and as soon as Leland got the upper hand and managed to push his brother aside, he immediately ran to the neighbors and called the police. Brett stayed in the house. He had nowhere to run. He realized that this was the moment he had completely screwed up his life. There was nothing to do. He took out his phone and wrote Kristen a letter asking her to forgive him. The police arrived at the crime scene and saw a bloody Brett, who was sitting next to his equally bloody but still alive brother Alexander, who would die later in the hospital. Brett himself asked the policeman to handcuff him and take him to the station, where he would confess to everything. He also said that his mother's body was hidden under packages in the garage, but it was impossible to help her. At the police station and later at the trial, Brett admitted that he did not want to kill Susan. His plan was only to scare her. Christopher and Alexander, on the other hand, he did plan to kill that day, but as witnesses, and if they hadn't arrived, they would still be alive. Just like almost 10 years ago, he tried to justify everything with his depressive state, but it did not soften his sentence. And despite the fact that the judge took into account the fact that Brett confessed to everything himself and did not cause the investigation any trouble, the young man received 3 life sentences, 1 for each murder, with the right to get parole in 2041. As for Leland, he's not speaking to reporters, but he's known throughout Toronto as the sole survivor of that carnage. Story 6. North Carolina, the birthplace of country, blues, and Cherokee Indians, is now a fairly conservative and prosperous state in the northern part of the South Atlantic states. Unlike South Carolina, the state is fairly quiet in terms of crime, and if it does make the national news networks, it is more often due to snowstorms, tornadoes, and severe thunderstorms. The coast, with tropical storms and flooding, or acres of dense wildlife refuges, with the danger of wildfires and landslides, cause far more danger than people. But not always. On April 10, 2019, it was 17-year-old Tristan Borlace who caused the storm. The teenager, from a religious large family, rather violently massacred his loved ones at the family home in Deep Gap, North Carolina. On Wednesday evening, emergency services received a call from a young woman reporting a large amount of blood in her home and 3 missing family members, her parents and younger brother. She added that she couldn't reach them. Police officers responded to the call and immediately drove to Deep Gap, about a mile from the Watauga and Wilkes County border. When patrol officers reached the home, they found blood on the walkway leading to the house, on the mat by the front door, and a blood trail inside the house stretching up the stairs. Officers searching the area outside found the body of a man covered in leaves, under a hammock with several stab wounds. A little later, at about 10:30 p.m., the family's pickup truck was found hidden in the woods, with the woman's body covered with a blanket and bags of mulch placed on top. A senseless, impulsive domestic tragedy. Jeffrey Borlace, Tristan's father, was born on April 16, 1975, the pastor of the Conservative Pietist Bible Fellowship Church, a Protestant religious movement with Mennonite roots. The boy was brought up in an atmosphere of special importance of personal piety and the feeling of being constantly under the strict and watchful eye of God. Serious and careful study of the Bible in the meetings and moral instruction were the foundation of his upbringing. Any kind of entertainment, even laughter and colorful clothing, was frowned upon. Good works, charity, missionary work, love for the enemy, and renunciation of all kinds of violence were considered virtuous. Jeffrey absorbed all these fundamentals as the son of Pastor Harry Borlas. He grew up a kind, loving, gentle, and patient boy. As a young man, Jeffrey got a summer job at the Big Surf Water Park, located on Lake of the Ozarks in the U.S. state of Missouri. On his first day of work, the young man met a charming, meek girl. Her name was Tanya Mae Trandom, same age, same views, and virtually the same upbringing. Tanya, like Jeffrey, had grown up in a family where Christian values were paramount. Patient, humble, selfless girl saw in the pious young man an ideal future husband and caring father. She gave Jeffrey a picture of an elderly couple holding hands and said, "That will be us one day." Jeffrey's mother, Kathy Brown, prayed that God would give her son a wife who loved the Lord with all her heart and believed her prayers were answered. The young lovers married, and their family became a continuation of the ideas in which they themselves were raised. The photo presented by Tanya was carefully kept in the family album. Quite quickly, the young couple had their first child, an adorable girl named Taylor. Then, one after another, came 3 more children. The youngest was a son, whom the parents named Tristan. Taylor became the truest big sister to her siblings. She took care of everyone, helped everyone, supported everyone, but especially the girl was friends with her younger brother. For Tristan, Taylor became the best and only friend. Despite the age difference, they were everywhere together. They played sports, were fond of music, and pranked together. Pietism believes that the task of parenting is to establish the kingdom of God in the child's heart. As the 4 children grew older, Jeffrey and Tanya decided to fulfill their Christian duty and adopted 4 more boys from the orphanage. Open, loving, and friendly, according to others, the family became even larger with a total of 8 children. Taylor, twins Kaya and Alexis, Misery, Al, Stephen, Meliku, and Tristan. According to the family's religious beliefs, children were forbidden to use cell phones and social networks until a certain age, and asceticism in needs and desires was encouraged. Boys were forbidden to date girls until the end of high school, that is, until the age of 18. Bible study and other religious matters were mandatory. Otherwise, children grew up like any other boys and girls. Parents made no distinction between native and adopted children. They were all given the same attention, care, and affection. The loving mother created a harmonious atmosphere and carefully watched the internal order. Relations between brothers and sisters, prayed a lot, and did good deeds. The couple believed that virtue should be nurtured by their own actions and taught their children mercy by example. When the people of Haiti were hit by a hurricane, Tanya sold her expensive wedding ring and sent the proceeds to a foundation building housing for the victims. In return, she bought herself a simple, regular, cheap ring. In 2015, Taylor graduated from high school and moved to Boone to attend Appalachian State University. This event hurt Tristan deeply. He lost his only friend and was alone. Taylor came home at the first opportunity, but now she had her own free life, and Tristan was left with the same old rules and routines. He had rebelled against the restrictions set since childhood and disagreed with his parents' religious views. He was annoyed by the lack of a cell phone and the inability to communicate with his peers on social networks, especially since such communication has become an integral part of the life of modern teenagers. After Taylor's departure, quarrels with his parents only became more frequent. In December 2017, there were pleasant changes in the life of the family. Jeffrey and his wife and children moved to a new house with a large lot in Deep Gap, Watauga County in North Carolina. The house was located on a dirt road leading into a wooded area and was much more spacious than the previous home. In addition, the new dwelling was just under 2 miles from the home of Robin, Tanya's mother, and the children's grandmother. The close proximity made it possible to call on her at any time if help was needed in looking after the youngest children. Whether the move had been as pleasant a change for Tristan was unknown, for he had to change his school and his surroundings. In Watauga, he went to the local high school and started track and field. Other kids took jobs as counselors at summer camps. At first glance, it might have seemed that there was never any trouble in the Borlas household, but that was not the case. Over time, Tristan's behavior became troubling. In 2018, The school insisted on several consultations with a psychologist about anger issues and a lack of impulsive behavior control. By 2019, when the young man was in high school, despite his excellent abilities, he began to have trouble understanding some school subjects, and these difficulties only increased with each passing day. From a diligent student who had always participated in the life of the school before the move, he turned into an indifferent, withdrawn teenager who lost interest in his studies. Tristan began to be late for lessons and had no desire to learn at all. It got to the point where he would put his headphones on during class and sit with an absent look. Some teachers tried to help Tristan, and he even made contact, but everything ended with unchanged indifference and lack of interest. Besides, the young man did not always behave adequately at home. By this time, he already had everything he constantly argued with his parents about: his own cell phone and access to social networks. Tristan spent a lot of time on his Instagram account. He referred to himself as a musician. Taylor was constantly interested in the lives of her siblings and noticed that Tristan quarreled with his parents more often and argued with his mom about religious topics. She learned of his other problems at school as well. The sister tried to talk to her brother, but the former closeness was no longer there. After a while, the young man became friends with a girl from the religious community, Evelyn Faith Jackson. They began to meet, not particularly observing the prohibition on intimate relations. Sometimes they smoked forbidden plants, and Tristan complained about his mother, who at night discusses his behavior with him, which made Tristan tired and unable to concentrate in school. The young man was very worried that he has many faults that make him not live up to his mother's expectations, and she cannot be proud of him. Told that with his father he can be himself, but with his mother it is different. On April 10, 2019, a lot of secret things from Tristan's life came to light. Surveillance cameras were installed in the barn where the goats were kept, and Tristan's old cell phone, which he sometimes used secretly from his parents, was used as an access point. On this day, Tanya took the phone for some reason and read text messages in which her son was having sexual conversations with girls and discussing illegal drugs with them. Tristan was at school at the time and saw his phone start blinking with incoming messages. Shocked parents wrote to him in a family chat about the information found on Tristan's old phone. That same day, Sherry King, an English teacher in Tristan's class, called his mother with complaints about the teenager's grades and behavior. She would later testify at trial that Tanya Borles called her back and told her that she and her husband would be at the school soon and would pick Tristan up early to discuss his grades with him. Sherry King relayed her parents' words to Tristan, who was extremely surprised by the news. The couple left their youngest child with his grandmother and went to the middle school to deal with what was going on. The ride home passed in silence. At trial, Tristan will testify that the mother seemed tense and frowned constantly while leafing through his phone. A conversation took place at home that lasted about an hour and a half, after which Tanya texted her mother and told her that Tristan was not upset that they had taken away his phone and car keys until grades and behavior improved, and she would be coming to pick up the younger child soon. The message was sent at 4 p.m., after which the conversation apparently continued. From Tristan's words, he and his mother talked about the need to do well in school, cleanliness in relationships with girls, the dangers of illegal drugs, and that she did not want him to study religions other than Christianity. He was forced to listen and realized how much there was in him that should be corrected. They even made a list of qualities he should have to become a better person. Compassion, honesty, this list the police would later find. At one point, Tristan said his mother approached him from behind, put her arm around his neck and applied pressure, causing him to instinctively jump up, turn around, and accidentally elbow her. According to him, his mother had never done anything like that, and that's why he reacted that way. His mother was startled by the blow, grabbed what he thought was a pair of scissors from a shelf, and moved toward her son. He, being in shock at what was happening, stabbed her, thinking he was defending himself, and ran to his father for help. Later, forensic examination will find no evidence on Tristan's neck that his mother strangled him, and during the trial, the prosecution will show the jury photos of Tanya Borla's neck taken by the medical examiner that show a broken neck bone. The psychologist, on the other hand, will show during the trial that, in his opinion, Tristan Borlas was mentally sane at the time of the crime, but suffered from a severely impaired cognitive state, experiencing depersonalization, derealization, and feeling events unreal. However, the court and jury would disregard the psychologist's opinion, finding Tristan to be a skillful manipulator and a socially dangerous individual. According to Tristan, he did not understand what was happening, why his father was running away from him, and why he stabbed his father when he caught up, even though he was begging him for help. He remembered his father picking up a rock and saying, "Tristan, don't," but was certain that his father would rather let him be killed than try to harm him. Neighbors later reported hearing loud screams on the Borlas property at about 5:30 p.m. that Wednesday. After it was over, Tristan returned to the house, where he vomited, which, in the psychologist's opinion, indicated severe stress, not cold-blooded, calculated murder. However, the jury disagreed with the psychologist's opinion. After all, they were presented with the forensic medical examiner's reports at trial. Jeffrey Borlas' autopsy report noted multiple stab wounds to the left chest and back, slash wounds to the arms and hands, and abrasions to the skull and forehead. Tanya Borlas' autopsy report indicated that she suffered multiple stab wounds, including to her left chest, back, and arm, as well as injuries that may have been sustained when her neck was compressed. The results indicate that the parents were defending themselves, not attacking. In addition, Tristan had a chance to get away from his mother if he felt threatened, and even if the mother was the victim of a sudden lapse of judgment and misperception of self-defense, the father's murder and subsequent actions already looked different. Tristan returned to the house, removed his mother's body and placed it in the truck, hiding it under a tarp. He then cleaned up the crime scene for about an hour and even used a hose to wash the porch outside the house. Around 8:30 p.m., Tristan arrived at his grandmother's house to pick up his younger brother. Robin thought this seemed extremely strange. Tristan explained that his parents urgently needed to go to the store and apologized that they didn't have time to stop by and pick up his brother. About 20 minutes later, Robin received a call from her other grandson, complaining that his parents were not answering the phone and had not come to pick him up from his part-time job as they usually did. Grandma dialed Alexis and asked her to go get her brother. They agreed that they would meet at Jeffrey and Tanya's house and figure out what had happened. As they drove up to the house, Robin noticed blood on the porch, but since the couple raised animals, she wasn't particularly concerned. She went into the house to get a flashlight to go check on the animals and saw that there was blood everywhere. At that time, Alexis ran into the house and reported that she had found some kind of body under the hammock near the animal barn, and she thought she saw Tristan with blood on his face in a getaway car. Alexis called emergency services. The operator told her, along with all family members, to lock themselves in the car and wait for the police to arrive. The police arrived 10 minutes later. After several hours of waiting outside and talking to officers, they were all taken to the station, where they were told that Jeffrey and Tanya Borlas had been found dead. While examining the crime scene, detectives located a computer interface in the home that connected the video surveillance system located inside the home to the monitors. Detectives saw a screen on the monitor with a grid of various cameras broadcasting live video. They immediately requested a warrant to obtain the credentials from the system's servicing company. Meanwhile, Tristan contacted his girlfriend Evelyn and arrived at her home. She realized that he was worried about something and he had a few scratches on his forehead and arms. Tristan assured her, however, that he had only had an argument with his parents and had gotten the scratches while playing with his dog. Described Tristan's injuries as 3 scratches on his forehead, a wound on his hand, a cut on his finger, and a bruised fingernail. Immediately after the crime, Tristan posted a photo of the injuries on Snapchat, writing that he was hurt by his father's dog. According to his girlfriend, the photo matched the injuries she saw on him that evening. Tristan stayed the night. The next morning they went to Walmart and McDonald's and were going to go to school, but then changed their minds. Evelyn was convinced that Tristan just wanted to get away from his parents for a while, so she offered to stay with one of her relatives for a while. He agreed and they traveled to another state. On April 11th, Sheriff's Office personnel obtained the username and password to the video surveillance system at the Borlas home. They reviewed the camera footage and learned the circumstances of the crime. Police obtained a warrant for Tristan's arrest and turned over the details of the vehicle he allegedly drove away to the National Crime Information Center. A search for the car, and subsequently, a chase began. Investigator Matthew received information that Tristan had been seen in Tennessee and began the paperwork involved in extraditing the alleged perpetrator. He asked Robin, Tristan's grandmother, to go with him to the apprehension so that he could talk to the young man in her presence, given his young age. As they drove in the car with Evelyn, Tristan noticed blue lights following them. He sped up and told his friend that his parents must have registered the car as stolen to find him. He sped down the highway trying to pull away but eventually gave in to his pursuers and pulled over. The Ford was surrounded by police cars. Evelyn was completely confused when she saw her boyfriend being handcuffed and taken away in a squad car. The officers noticed that Tristan did not appear upset or agitated. His April 11, 2019 interview, which was conducted by investigator Matthew, was videotaped and audio recorded. The young man answered all questions, confessed to the crime, and detailed all his actions. Times he cried. Tristan Borlas, who was a month away from his 18th birthday, was taken into custody without bail. A little later, the sheriff's office obtained a warrant to investigate Tristan's Snapchat account, and a total of 5 of his that may have contained information related to the crime. A search warrant was also issued for the Orchard Road home, where detectives found another phone found in the master bedroom, a keyboard and pen from a safe, paper cups, a hammer, a straw, knives, a red-stained swab, eyeglasses, a kitchen towel, a hammock, a digital video recorder, a rug and miscellaneous papers, South Dakota cards, and boots. According to court documents, a search warrant was also issued for the Ford F-150 truck, and a red-stained swab, laptop computer, charger, and steering wheel cover were seized. A warrant was also issued to search the home of Tristan's girlfriend in Boone, as the young man was spending the night at her house. Court documents say a pillowcase, a zippered sweatshirt, and a notebook were seized from the property. The results of the investigations and searches helped investigators reconstruct the chronology of events down to the moments. The version of self-defense was considered untenable. Funeral services for the couple were held on April 17, 2019, at Bible Fellowship Church. Pastors William Krantz and Brad Gray officiated the ceremony. The children, experiencing the loss of their parents at such an early age, found the strength to write a touching obituary. Our parents never got the opportunity to live for themselves because they always lived for us. Jeff and Tanya have always been an incredible joy to their parents and always a source of pride. Our parents made the world a better place, and we hope to continue that legacy by passionately loving people and pursuing Jesus. After the funeral, Taylor visited her brother in prison for the first time and was unpleasantly struck by his behavior. Not only was Tristan unrepentant, but he tried to blame the family for what had happened. It seemed to her sister that he was convinced he would regain his freedom sooner or later. Taylor felt disgusted, turned around and left. Her second visit was on May 11th, on the occasion of Tristan's birthday. This time, she came with Grandma Robin, but the meeting was not much different from the previous one. Her brother was praising the party they'd thrown for him at the prison in honor of his birthday. Taylor found the behavior unacceptable, especially since their parents had died tragically. After this visit, the family decided to cut off any contact with Tristan. The trial began on February 16, 2022. At the trial, Tristan expressed regret for what had happened. He agreed with everything his family had said about him and supported the decision for a permanent ban on contact to make the family feel safe. On March 3rd, Tristan Borlas was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on each count of first-degree murder. Judge Horn noted that mental health was somewhat of a mitigating factor, as the psychologist's report indicated that Tristan Borlas continued to suffer from anxiety, depression, and had developed symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder. However, Judge Horn stated that the psychologist found no evidence of psychotic disorders, although the anxiety and depression may indeed have been exacerbated by the continued use of illegal drugs. The most unusual fact in this story is that neither Tristan's family, nor his lawyer, nor he himself, made any statements about the motives that led to the crime. A pious family and a socially dangerous man using illegal drugs, who himself did not fully understand the reasons for what happened or competently played the misunderstanding, that's on the one hand. And on the other hand, a self-hating young guy with low self-esteem, prone to depression, actively demonstrating symptoms of anxiety and not receiving the necessary qualified medical care. During the court session, the fact of panic attacks, which his mother helped him cope with, as she herself was prone to them, was voiced. One of the main provisions of the pedagogy of pietism: children burdened with original sin are immoral from birth, and therefore education in school should correct them, preparing them for the correct, from the point of view of pietism, behavior in life by establishing strict discipline and suppression of children's self-consciousness. Strict love is supposedly for the good. A child who may have had an inherited overreactivity of the nervous system grew up under strict limits, constantly feeling that he was not a good enough godly person. Some by nature need more love, some less. The little boy was intensely jealous, according to his older sister's recollections, of the new brothers, whose appearance shifted the parents' attention. First there was rebellion, then depressed moods and feelings of worthlessness, joined by illicit weed, panic attacks and depersonalization derealization states. He didn't accept his parents' religiosity. He couldn't be what his mother wanted him to be, and to be what he was meant to be in need of correction. Was that list of needed fixes that the two of them wrote together with his mom, instead of finding contacts for a good therapist, the last straw? And was there any way to avoid such a senseless and merciless tragedy in a truly loving family? In the mid-2000s, this high-profile case shook the whole of America and was actively covered in the press. The horrific crime was investigated for several years before the killer was finally brought to justice. One of the main reasons for this delay was the lack of a visible motive and disconnected evidence, and no one simply could not believe that this man was capable of it. The investigation took almost 6 long years to put the puzzle together, and the investigator at the trial openly stated that he had never encountered anything like this in his many years of practice. In this tragic story found a place and a love triangle, and double betrayal, and an ominous omen which at first no one paid attention to. Jason Young. Not much is known about him. Jason comes from Brevard, North Carolina, where he was born in 1974. He grew up in an ordinary family after graduating from high school, became a student at the prestigious state university in the capital of his native state, the city of Raleigh, and after graduating, got a job as a salesman in a large retail chain. At work, Jason Young proved himself to be a valuable and promising employee, who could always be relied on, but friends spoke of him as a man who was windy and fickle. In relations with the opposite sex, he was fickle and often changed women, for which he got a reputation as a womanizer, which, however, he himself was even proud. Michelle Marie Young, maiden name Fisher, was born in New York in February 1977. The girl was raised with her younger sibling Meredith, with whom they were very close from childhood. Their mother, Linda, spent a lot of time with her adored daughters, tried to support them in everything, and contribute to the development of their abilities and talents. Since her school years, Michelle was fond of law and economics, dreaming of linking her life with this very activity. After graduating from school, she applied to several universities at once, and soon received a positive answer from the capital of North Carolina. The girl diligently studied at the Faculty of Economics and Law, receiving a master's degree in this field. After receiving her diploma, Michelle was hired for a high position in one of the leading accounting firms in the state. Yesterday's student was earning well, fully supporting herself, and making big plans for the future. She decided to celebrate her 24th birthday at one of the most popular entertainment venues in the city with her close friends and colleagues. They were heartily enjoying themselves when some stranger awkwardly turned around and knocked a glass with a cocktail out of the birthday girl's hands. The guy immediately started apologizing and, to make amends, bought Michelle another cocktail. That young man was Jason Young, and the pretty young Michelle immediately caught his eye. He sat down at her table and started a casual conversation, joked a lot, tried to be witty and interesting, and at the end of the evening asked her out on a date. It should be noted that Michelle also liked the casual acquaintance, so she willingly accepted his invitation, deciding that it was fate itself made her a gift on her birthday. The couple began to communicate, and soon they realized that they had a lot in common. They both studied at the same university, although Jason got his degree 3 years earlier, supported the same hockey team, and were fans of the same music group. Between young people began a romantic relationship, but to live together, much less get married, was out of the question. At the time of the beginning of his relationship with Michelle, Jason was still living at his parents' house in Brevard. He would only visit his girlfriend in Raleigh on weekends or meet with her during work trips to the state capital. During one of these meetings, his sweetheart informed him that she was pregnant. This news was a real shock for both of them, because neither of them was not yet ready for the birth of a child. Young people were keen on work, confidently climbing the career ladder, and did not plan to create a family yet. Jason said so at once, but Michelle, after some hesitation, decided that she would not have an abortion and would keep the baby. Jason took about a month to rethink the situation, after which he moved to Raleigh to be near his pregnant girlfriend. After a few more months, the couple officially legalized their relationship, though it was not love or pregnancy that contributed to it, but Michelle's lack of health insurance. Childbirth would have cost the couple a huge amount of money, but marriage gave them the opportunity to avoid such expenses. The daughter of the couple Young was born in the spring of 2004. She was given the name Cassidy Elizabeth. The newly married mother went headlong into domestic life and family chores and helped her in this mom and younger sister. It should be noted that Michelle's family coolly accepted her chosen one. They were wary of Jason, but tried to avoid conflicts. In the same year, the young couple with a child moved to their own large house, located in a quiet and landscaped area of the city. Mother Linda, who came to visit her daughter and granddaughter and help with the household, was the first to notice that there was a certain tense atmosphere in this family. Son-in-law was too emotional, irascible, could arrange a scandal literally in the same place, but Michelle tried in every way to smooth out all the quarrels and in public behaved like the happiest wife and mother. Only Mother Linda she could sincerely tell about what was really happening. An ominous omen. When Cassidy was barely 2 years old, Michelle became pregnant again. She gingerly broke the news to her spouse, but he reacted calmly and seemed even happy about it. Soon the family traveled by car to Brevard to personally tell the happy news to Jason's parents. They came to visit only for the weekend, and on the first day they celebrated the upcoming addition in the circle of relatives. And the next day, leaving their little daughter for a couple of hours with her grandparents, the couple went to a restaurant to celebrate the event together. As the couple was driving home, Jason, who was driving, overcorrected, oversteered, and the car went off the road into a ravine. The couple were frightened with a few abrasions and bruises, but their lives were not threatened. However, Michelle had a miscarriage on nervous grounds, because of which the young woman was very worried. Jason took it surprisingly calmly. The accident, the loss of a child, and some strange indifference of the spouse, all this looked very suspicious. Later, Linda Fisher would call that accident a bad omen that no one paid proper attention to at the time. The young couple had a mutual friend named Michelle Monty, whom they had known since their days at the same university. For some time they did not see each other, but in the spring of 2006, shortly before the accident, Jason, during a work trip, accidentally met an old acquaintance. He told his wife about it, and together they decided to invite Monty to visit him. The young woman willingly accepted the invitation, but during her visit began to complain about her unhappy family life and problems in her relationship with her husband. At the same time, she constantly praised Jason and told his wife how lucky she was. Pregnant Michelle was somehow not alarmed by such behavior of the guest. She sincerely wanted to comfort and support her friend, but Young took what was happening as a call to action. Jason had never missed an opportunity to flirt before, but this relationship quickly went beyond flirting and friendly support. Jason Young and Michelle Monty began calling each other almost daily and sneaking out to see each other. Jason always justified his absence by business trips, and his wife did not guess anything. In the summer of 2006, Michelle informed her husband that she was pregnant again, but this time Jason was not happy at all. The wife did understand what was happening. She felt that the beloved away from her, but believed that this is due to the miscarriage that occurred a few months ago. Jason himself all this time was thinking hard about how to get rid of marital bonds with the least loss to himself. In early November, when Michelle was 5 months pregnant, her husband had another business trip. He traveled 300 miles away from home in his own car, but had booked a hotel room about halfway through the trip. That evening, a pregnant Michelle had a long conversation with her best friend on the phone, telling her about problems in the family and mentioning that she had had a big fight with her husband the night before he left. After the conversation, she went upstairs, put her daughter to bed, and fell asleep next to her. About 10 o'clock in the evening, Jason reached the hotel, and as he claimed to be tired from the road, went straight to bed. In reality, he was scrutinizing all the entrances, exits, and the location of the security cameras, planning how to leave the hotel, and then return undetected. Jason was preparing an ironclad alibi for what he thought would be the perfect crime. In the early morning hours, Young called his wife's sister to ask for help. He said he wanted to give his wife a piece of jewelry for their wedding anniversary, but he had accidentally sent a page from an online store to home fax machine. He worried that Michelle would see his gift, and there would be no surprise. Meredith, though she disliked her son-in-law, still agreed to help him. When Meredith arrived at her sister's house, she entered through a secret door in the garage that only family members knew about, and that was always unlocked. The house was suspiciously quiet, although the landlady's papers, keys, and wallet were in the hallway, indicating that she hadn't gone anywhere. When she went upstairs, Meredith saw that the bedroom door was wide open, but neither her sister nor her niece answered her call. When she entered the room, she saw a gruesome sight. Michelle was lying with a fractured skull on the floor by the bed in a pool of her own blood. Blood was everywhere. On the walls, furniture, and baby bloody footprints were visible next to the body. Unfortunately, no one could help the pregnant woman. She had been dead for hours. Her sister rushed to call the emergency services when suddenly she heard rustling under the bed, looked there, and saw little Cassidy, who looked at her incomprehensibly. Cassidy was not hurt, but she was frightened. The girl saw her mother's death, and afterwards spent many hours by her body, as evidenced by the marks on the floor, as well as the toys she brought to her mother. Later, forensic experts found a huge number of bruises, abrasions, and fractures on the body of the deceased, which spoke of a long and brutal beating. Michelle's teeth were knocked out, and her skull was fractured with a blunt, heavy object. Later, this instrument of crime was never found. A bloody pillow was lying next to the body, and the marks indicated that the victim had been smothered with it. Nothing was stolen from the house, which means that the night visitor had only one goal: murder. In addition, the locks had not been broken, and there were no signs of forced entry, indicating that the perpetrator had a key or knew about the secret door, which, again, was known only to family members. In such cases, the main suspect is always the spouse of the deceased, but he had a seemingly perfect alibi. He claimed that he checked into his hotel room and did not leave until the morning, and then went to a scheduled business meeting. A check confirmed that Young had used his room keycard in the evening to get in and in the morning to get out, but a detailed investigation soon revealed a host of oddities and inconsistencies. For example, a hotel employee discovered early in the morning that the emergency exit was not only open, but also propped up with a cobblestone to prevent the door from slamming shut. When the investigation decided to check the surveillance camera pointed at that door to find out who had done it, it turned out that this same camera had been deliberately disabled on the night of the crime. Moreover, it stopped recording about half an hour after Young checked into his room. The weirdness didn't end there. It turned out that during the night, a man who looked like Jason was getting gas at a station between the hotel and the crime scene, but during the night, he was asked to provide identification as per the rules. He refused to do so, threw cash, and without waiting for change, quickly left. The gas station attendant at the inquest identified Jason Young, but the man continued to deny everything, insisting that he had slept in his hotel room during the night. Another oddity was that on the day before the tragedy, Young called Michelle Money more than 24 times, and closer to morning, he called his mistress 5 more times, with each conversation lasting no more than 15 seconds, suggesting that Jason was probably panicking, and all of these calls were made outside the hotel, where he, in his own words, had been all night. He was also late for a scheduled business meeting with his partners, and looked somewhat confused. However, none of this evidence, either individually or all of them together, proved that Young had indeed massacred his pregnant wife. Years of investigation and a long-awaited verdict. For almost 3 years, Jason lived the life he'd always lived. Moreover, he achieved custody of his young daughter, which was a serious blow to the relatives of his dead wife. By that time, he stopped hiding his relationship with Money, who was once friends with the murdered Michelle, which only increased suspicion that it was Young committed this brutal crime. Jason was arrested only at the end of 2009, but then, despite the large amount of evidence to prove his guilt failed, because the jury did not come to a consensus. However, the case was reopened in 2012 when more evidence was collected, and the testimony of witnesses who saw Jason Young that night outside the hotel in different places. In particular, his rather conspicuous white car was seen parked on the night of the murder not far from his own house, in an unlit lot. Also included in the case was the testimony of a child psychologist who told of little Cassidy's strange doll play, during which the girl showed how her daddy spanked her mom, and then she would not get up off the floor. Manny took the stand as a witness in court. She confessed that Jason had cheated on his wife with her, but justified it by saying that he was deeply unhappy in his family life, as he told everyone. And another former mistress of the defendant admitted that she was afraid of his outbursts of anger when he lost control and could hit her. After a long trial, Jason Young was finally found guilty of brutally assaulting his pregnant wife. For this crime, he was sent to prison for life with no right to ever be released. In 2014, convicted, Jason filed his first appeal, but it was denied. In 2018, he again asked for a review of his case, but a panel of the State Court of Appeals again denied it. Cassidy was virtually orphaned. Her mother was murdered, and her father went to prison for the crime. The girl is being raised by her aunt and maternal grandparents. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with me until the end. I hope the stories gave you something to think about, or dream about. Sleep well, stay safe, and don't forget to subscribe. Good night.